My house will soon be 130 years old. It is nearly twice my age, but we both creak and groan in the morning. I with my joints, he with the floorboards and rafters. Victorian architecture, with all its frills, turrets, bay windows, and elaborate platbans, is now a rarity in Worcester. Most of these houses were torn down in the 80s, making way for faceless modern buildings. My name is Leonard Davison. I'm 76 years old, and I live in the house my grandfather built. There used to be at least a dozen of these houses on Beacon Street. Now only mine remains. 3 stories of dark wood and red brick, skylights that look out onto the street like squinted eyes, and a porch with carved columns. Inside are 15 rooms, most of which are now closed. I only live in a few: a bedroom on the second floor, a kitchen, a living room, and a workshop in the basement. This morning I walked down the stairs as usual, holding on to the mahogany banister, polished to a shine by thousands of touches over the decades. On the third step from the bottom, a floorboard creaked, the same one that had been creaking since I was a kid. My father never fixed it, saying it was a watchman's creak, warning of uninvited guests. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on and went to the window. A car stopped in front of my house, a black SUV with tinted windows, not the kind of car usually parked on our quiet street. After a minute, a woman in a business suit with a folder in her hands got out of it and headed toward my house. I didn't answer the door when she rang the bell. After the third attempt, she left the business card in the mailbox and left. This was the third business card in a week, all from different real estate agencies. I didn't invite anyone or put the house on the market. Something is going on, and I'm sure it has something to do with my son Brandon and his wife Felicity. Grace, my late wife, used to say I was too hard on the boy. Maybe she was right. I wanted him to carry on the family business, to become a cabinet maker like me and my father before me. But Brandon chose to work as an insurance appraiser, a stable profession, as he put it, as if building furniture that will outlive you and your children wasn't stable enough. Grace died 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, quickly and mercilessly. We were together for almost 50 years. After she died, the house seemed too big and empty. Brandon offered to move in with him and Felicity, but I declined. This house is all I have left but memories. Felicity never made a secret of how she felt about our old house. A museum piece, she once said, thinking I couldn't hear. Her mother, Vanessa, was even worse. Every time she came to visit, she defiantly shook off her clothes as if the very air of the house was covered in centuries-old dust. I pulled a business card out of the mailbox. Emma Thornton, luxury real estate specialist, the card read. On the back was handwritten, ready to offer a great price for your home. Call. While the kettle was boiling, I called the number on the card. Homestead Real Estate Agency. How can I help you? A woman's voice answered. This is Leonard Davison. You left your card in my mailbox. Oh, Mr. Davison. The woman perked up. We are very interested in purchasing your Beacon Street property. We have a potential buyer who... I didn't put the house on the market, I interrupted. Who gave you my address? The pause on the other end of the line lengthened. Showroom. You see, we were informed that the property would soon be available for purchase. Perhaps it was your relatives who mentioned... I felt the blood rush to my face. My relatives have no right to own my house. Have a nice day. I hung up, clutching the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. So Brandon and Felicity had decided to go behind my back. I should have known. After their last visit a month ago, Felicity had spent a long time looking around the rooms, making some notes on her phone. Just figuring out what I can update to make you more comfortable, she'd said then. I never had my tea. Instead, I went down to the basement, to my workshop. It's the only place I still feel useful. Despite the arthritis in my fingers, I can still work with wood. Touching wood always soothes me, an eternal material that survives generations. Right now, I was working on a maplewood box for Mrs. Eleanor Price, widow of my longtime friend Robert. Eleanor is one of the few people who still visits me. Sometimes we drink tea, reminisce about the past, and complain about sore feet, the usual old man talk. I had been in the workshop for several hours polishing a jewelry box when I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Through the small basement window, I saw Brandon's familiar blue sedan. An uninvited visit in the middle of the week was unusual. I went upstairs, wiping my hands with a rag soaked in linseed oil. Brandon entered without knocking, using the spare key. Felicity followed him in, dressed as she always was for a business meeting, flawless makeup, hair in a tight bun, pearl earrings in her ears. She's 38, but she looks 45. Too serious, too calculating. "Dad," Brandon hugged me awkwardly. "How are you?" "Better than yesterday, worse than tomorrow," I replied with my usual banter. "What brings you in the middle of the week?" "We're worried about you, Leonard," Felicity said in the tone of a caring nurse. "You're all alone here, in such a big house." "I'm doing fine." I went into the kitchen and they followed me. "Would you like some tea?" "Dad, we're serious." Brandon sat down at the table. "This house is too big for one person. It costs a fortune to maintain, and it's only going to get more expensive every year." "Sure, I can handle the bill." I started making tea to keep my hands busy. "I have enough savings." "But why do you need this burden?" Felicity intervened. "You could sell the house, buy a cozy apartment, and live carefree." I watched the brew color the water a dark brown. I miss Grace at times like this. She always knew how to gently but firmly put our daughter-in-law in her place. "This house was built by my grandfather," I said quietly. "My father was born in it. Me and you, Brandon. Your mother died here. It's not just walls and a roof. It's our family history. History is beautiful, Dad, but you can't live in the past forever." Brandon spoke softly, but I could hear the rehearsed notes in his voice. "Think about the future. What happens to the house when you're gone?" "No. When I die, the house will pass to you, as we've always planned." I set the cups of tea in front of them. "What am I supposed to do with it?" There was a hint of irritation in my son's voice. "Felicity and I aren't moving here." "You can sell it then if you want," I shrugged. "But as long as I'm alive, the house is still mine." Felicity and Brandon looked at each other, and I saw something in that look that made me uncomfortable. "There's another option," Felicity began cautiously. "Mom knows a great real estate agent. He suggested an auction. It's the most profitable way to sell such a unusual property." "Auction?" I took a sip of tea, trying to hide my surprise. "Since when does your mother make decisions about my house?" "Don't start, Dad," Brandon grumbled. "We were just discussing options." Behind my back, I set the cup aside. "And not just discussing. A realtor was here this morning, the third one this week. For some reason, they're convinced the house will be on the market soon." A flicker of irritation flashed across Felicity's face, but she quickly pulled herself together. "It's just a preliminary consultation, Leonard. We want you to get the best value when you decide to sell." "If I decide," I corrected. "When you decide to sell," she repeated with pressure. "It's not wise to live alone in a house like this at your age." After they left, I sat on the porch for a long time, looking out at the street where I'd grown up. Most of the neighbors I remembered from my childhood had long since died or moved away. New faces, new families. I had become a living anachronism, just like my house. In the evening, Eleanor called to see how work on the box was progressing. I told her about the strange visit from my son and daughter-in-law. "Be careful, Leonard," she said after a pause. "They seem to be up to something. Felicity always struck me as a little too determined." "I'm an old man, but I'm not stupid," I replied. "I'll be on my guard." I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Something told me that the realtors and the auction talk were just the tip of the iceberg. Brandon and Felicity were obviously hiding something, and I was determined to find out what it was. For the next few days, I acted like nothing had happened. I called Brandon, asking about his job, wondering how Ethan's grandson was doing, who was attending college on the other side of the country. I didn't mention the realtors or the auction, pretending the conversation about selling the house was forgotten. My tactic worked. On Saturday, Brandon called and casually announced that he and Felicity and her mother would be stopping by for lunch on Sunday. "Felicity's mom hasn't seen your house in a while. She wants to admire it," he said in such a faux carefree tone that I wanted to laugh. "Vanessa Holt hates old houses. In her words, they smell like mold and senile infirmity. For her, the owner of a designer clothing boutique, elegance lies in sterile newness." I agreed, trying to sound like my usual self, a slightly grumpy but generally malleable old man. After the call, I walked around the house checking for listening devices anywhere. Paranoia? Maybe. But when your sister-in-law and her mother are conspiring behind your back, it's best to be safe. Sunday was overcast. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, leaden clouds covered the sky, threatening rain. Brandon's car pulled up at exactly 2:30, followed 5 minutes later by Vanessa's white convertible. It was too flashy for a woman her age, but Vanessa was always trying to look younger than her 63 years. I met them on the porch, leaning on my cane, not so much out of necessity as to create the right image. Let them think I was getting weaker. It would loosen their tongues. "Leonard, darling." Vanessa nuzzled the air near my cheek, enveloping me in a cloud of luscious perfume. "How do you manage alone in this historic building?" "The house takes care of me as much as I take care of it," I replied, letting them inside. Felicity looked around the hallway with a meticulous eye. "It's like it's darker in here than last time." She wrinkled her nose. "And damp. Please come into the kitchen. I've made lunch." I ignored her remark. Lunch passed in strained conversation about the weather, politics, and Ethan's academic progress. After dessert, apple pie, the recipe for which Grace kept as a treasure, Brandon offered to show Felicity's mother the house. "Vanessa had never seen the upper floors," he said. "There's so much to see up there. Since when did my son become interested in Victorian architecture?" But I agreed, saying I was tired. "You go ahead, I'll rest in the parlor. Old bones need a break." They left, talking in low voices, and I listened to their footsteps. When the sounds died down on the second floor, I crept quietly after them. Years of woodworking had taught me how to move silently, even on creaky floors. All I had to do was know where to put my foot. I reached the second floor and heard their voices coming from Brandon's former nursery, which Grace and I had long ago converted into a guest room. The door was ajar, and I cautiously moved closer, trying to remain invisible. "The auction is set for 2 weeks from today," Vanessa said. "Quentin had arranged everything. We just have to get the old man to sign the papers." "Quentin must be the expert in the know." "He's stubborn," that was Felicity's voice. "He's clinging to this house like it's got something of value." "There is to him," Brandon answered quietly. "It's his childhood home, our family home." "Don't start that again," Felicity cut him off. "We've talked about this 100 times. The house is falling apart. The upkeep is eating up all the money, and your father is getting old. Soon he won't be able to live here alone." "Quentin says the land is worth more than the house," Vanessa intervened. "Tearing down this wreck and building townhouses is what's profitable. The lot can accommodate at least 4 units. It took my breath away. "They want to tear down my grandfather's house? The house where 3 generations of Davisons grew up? But how do you get my father to agree to the auction?" Brandon asked. He had already suspected something wrong after the realtor's visit. "Leave that to me," Vanessa said smugly. "I have a trump card up my sleeve." Quentin had found some old city document that said the house needed major repairs or it would be declared an emergency. "It's going to cost a fortune. Your father just can't afford it." "What if he does find the money?" Brandon sounded doubtful. "He won't," Felicity cut him off. "We checked his accounts when we helped him with his tax returns last year. He has savings, but not that much. They went through my finances. This is getting out of hand." "Once the house goes up for auction," Vanessa continued, "Quentin will make sure the bidding goes through properly. The first buyer, a front man, will offer a ridiculous price, and the second buyer, my friend Audrey's company, will slightly raise the bid and win. After that, we'll buy the house back from Audrey at a small markup." "Oh, and your father will get at least some money," Felicity added, turning to Brandon. "Not that he'd need it with his modest life." "You'll get all the money after he's gone, you know." "You know." "Don't say that," Brandon said quietly. "He could still live for many years." "In a nursing home, maybe," Vanessa snorted. "But not here. Those stairs will kill him one day. You can see how he can barely make it up the stairs. So that's why I've been leaning defiantly on my cane? To reinforce their belief in my infirmity?" "Anyway, we need his signature," Felicity said. "Do you think, Brandon, maybe we should ask Dr. Parker to prescribe him a sedative? Say it's vitamins." "No, that's too much," Brandon countered, and I felt faintly relieved. At least my son wasn't ready to outright lie to me yet. "Let's just talk to him again. Explain about the renovations, the expenses." "Say goodbye to your sentiments, Brandon," Felicity said sharply. "There's no room for emotion in business. Your father will get fair compensation, and we, a piece of land in a prestigious neighborhood, and the opportunity to earn money." Everyone wins. Especially you and your mother, Brandon muttered. What did you say? Felicity's voice rang with metal. Nothing. I was just thinking about how best to present this to my father. I heard footsteps and barely had time to retreat into the next room, the former office where Grace used to work. From there, through the ajar door, I saw them leave the nursery and head down the hall. You don't even have to look at the third floor, Felicity said. It's all going to be demolished anyway. When they got higher, I tiptoed downstairs to the living room and sat in my chair, pretending to doze off. Thoughts swarmed through my head like angry wasps. My own son is involved in a conspiracy to deprive me of my home under the pretense of caring for me, and he's doing it for the money his wife and mother-in-law want to make. 15 minutes later, they came back. I pretended I'd just woken up. Did you like the house? I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. Delicious, Vanessa smiled sweetly. So much history, so many memories. But Leonard, I have to say, I've noticed a few disturbing things. The cracks in the ceiling on the third floor, the sagging floor in the far room. An old house needs constant maintenance, I shrugged. Nothing out of the ordinary. Mikey, but it's so expensive. Felicity sat down on the arm of my chair like a concerned daughter. And so burdensome for you. I'm doing fine, I said briefly. Dad, Brandon sat down across from me. Felicity and Vanessa and I have talked, and we think that selling the house at auction is really the best option. Vanessa knows a great professional who will organize everything. Quentin? I asked innocently. There was silence. Vanessa and Felicity looked at each other. Yes, his name is Quentin Radley, Vanessa said slowly. Do you know him? No, I just heard the name around town, I lied. I'll think about your offer. Right now, I need to rest. The day was enlightening. After they left, I sat in silence for a long time. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I stroked the armrests of the chair, thinking about how many generations of my family had sat in it. How could I let outsiders destroy that legacy? But direct confrontation would get me nowhere. If I openly oppose their plan, they'll just find another way. Maybe they'll actually put something in my food or declare me incompetent. No, we have to do it their way, secretly, calculatingly. I went upstairs to the bedroom I'd once shared with Grace. In the dresser drawer, under a stack of old sweaters, was a box of papers. Home ownership certificate, insurance policies, will. I pulled out a worn business card I'd kept for years. Hugo Whitman, attorney at law. Hugo had been a friend of mine since my youth, one of the few who was still alive. Picking up the phone, I dialed the number. After the third ring, I heard a familiar, husky voice. Whitman here. Hugo, it's Leo. I need your help, I said. I'm having trouble with my family and my house. What's wrong, old man? I briefly outlined the situation. Hugo listened without interrupting, only occasionally snickering. What a family, he said when I was done. What do you want to do? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I'm not giving them the house, not for any money. Then we need a plan, Hugo said quietly. Come to my office tomorrow and bring all the deeds to the house. I think I have an idea. When I hung up the phone, I was relieved. I had an ally. My hands may not be as strong as they used to be, but my mind is still sharp. I'm not going down without a fight. If Brandon and Felicity want a war, they'll get one. 2 weeks flew by like a day. Hugo and I worked out a detailed plan of action, and I was ready for the big day. Strangely, I wasn't nervous at all. I felt more like a hunter on the prowl. Perhaps it was age. When you are over 70, many fears recede. What's the worst that could happen? I'll lose and be without a home? Sad, but not fatal. But if I win... The morning of the auction day was clear and cold. The first frost covered the lawns with frost, which sparkled in the rays of the rising sun. I rose early, stood under a hot shower for a long time, kneading old joints, then shaved thoroughly. I pulled my best suit out of the closet, the navy blue one with the vest I'd worn to Grace's funeral. It had gotten a little big in 5 years, age drying up the body, but it still fit decently. Brandon was supposed to pick me up at 10. The auction started at 11 at the Worcester City Hall. Vanessa, with the help of her Quentin, had persuaded the city to issue some kind of injunction to fix up the house, and I had agreed to put it up for auction, as if I couldn't see any other way out. My son arrived 1 minute later. He looked tense, avoided looking me in the eye. Are you ready, Dad? He asked, tapping his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. As ready as you can be to lose the house you've lived in all your life, I answered with deliberate bitterness. Brandon flinched but didn't say anything. We didn't exchange another word the whole way. I stared out the window at the familiar streets of Worcester floating by and thought about how my own son had been so weak that he'd let his wife and mother-in-law manipulate him. Worcester City Hall is an impressive red brick building with white columns and dome. As a young man, I was involved in its restoration, working on the wood paneling in the main hall. My work is still there. The oak rosettes on the ceiling beams, which I carved by hand. Felicity and Vanessa were already waiting for us in the hall, both in smart suits, as if they were at a business meeting. Next to them stood a thin man with slick-back hair and a face as sharp as a ferret's. It had to be the notorious Quentin Radley. "Leonard, how are you?" Vanessa stepped toward me with feigned concern. "Tough day, I know." "I'll get over it," I said dryly. "It's not the first time I've lost something precious." Felicity wrinkled her nose slightly, but quickly returned the mask of sympathy to her face. "Let me introduce you to Quentin Radley," she said. "He's the real estate expert who organized the auction." "It's a pleasure, Mr. Davison." Radley held out his hand with long, piano-like fingers. "I'm sorry about the circumstances, but I assure you, I'll do my best to make the process go smoothly." "You bet," I thought, shaking the cold palm. "It's time to go. The auction is about to start." Vanessa hurried everyone up. The auction was held in the small meeting room. The room was about half full, about 20 people. Most of them, most likely, were representatives of real estate developers attracted by the opportunity to buy a plot of land in the historic district. I noticed a few familiar faces, neighbors who had probably come out of curiosity. Brandon and I sat in the front row. Felicity sat next to him, and Vanessa sat a little farther back, next to an older woman in an elegant hat, probably her friend Audrey, who was to play a role in their scam. Quentin Radley walked to the podium, where the auctioneer, a heavyset man with a bushy mustache, was already standing. I looked around and spotted Hugo in the far corner of the room, who nodded at me. Everything was going according to plan. The auction began with formal announcements. The auctioneer read the lot description: a historic Victorian-style building at number 38 Beacon Street with an adjoining parcel of land of 0.5 of an acre. He then mentioned the city ordinance requiring major repairs and announced a starting price of $250,000, which was ridiculously low for such a house and lot in this neighborhood. "The house needs a lot of work," the auctioneer explained, "so the starting price is below market value." I felt Felicity lean over to Brandon and whisper something in his ear. My son sat stone-faced, looking straight ahead. The bidders were given license plates. I got the number 17 plate, which I kept lowered in my lap for now, hidden from view. "So, we start the bidding with a starting price of $250,000, announced the auctioneer. "Who bids $250,000? The sign was raised by an unassuming woman in the back row, clearly a front person, the first participant in the conspiracy. "We have an offer of $250,000, confirmed the auctioneer. "Who's offering $275,000? Silence. No one raised the sign. 250,000 times, the auctioneer began counting down. I noticed Audrey, Vanessa's friend, nervously rubbing her plate, waiting for the signal. 250,000, Vanessa gave Audrey a subtle nod and she held up her sign. "We have a bid of 275,000, announced the auctioneer. "Who's offering 300,000? Silence again. Everything was going exactly according to Vanessa's script. I could feel Felicity beside me starting to relax. Their plan was working. 275,000 times. 275,000. I continued to sit still, feeling my heart pounding in my chest, but not from fear, from anticipation. 275,003. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Sold for $275,000 to the bidder number 23. The gavel had already started to come down when I raised my placard sharply. 300,000, I said loudly. The gavel froze in midair. A whisper swept through the hall. Felicity beside me flinched and turned around, her face contorted with shock. We have a bid of 300,000 from bidder number 17. The auctioneer seemed surprised, but quickly pulled himself together. Who's offering 325,000? Vanessa furiously whispered something in Audrey's ear, but she shook her head in confusion. Apparently, she didn't have the authority to raise the bid without prior approval. Radley, standing at the podium, looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. 300,000 times, the auctioneer began. What are you doing? Felicity hissed furiously, leaning over Brandon toward me. You can't bid on your own house. Why not? I asked innocently. There's no such prohibition in the rules. But you don't have that kind of money. Her eyes widened with anger. Are you sure? I smiled. You only check my regular accounts, right? Felicity turned pale. Brandon stared at me with his mouth open. Dad, what's going on? Quiet, son. I'm bidding on an auction, I replied calmly. 300,000 too, the auctioneer continued. I saw Vanessa jump up from her seat and walk quickly over to Radley, reprimanding him angrily. The auctioneer's hands fluttered helplessly. Even if they were in cahoots, he didn't dare break the auction rules in front of so many witnesses. 300,003, the auctioneer raised the gavel. Sold to bidder number 17 for $300,000. The gavel dropped with a final clang onto the wooden stand. I exhaled deeply. The house was still mine. I'd bought it back, albeit with my own money. Felicity jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. You can't do this, she shouted. It's fraud. Cheating? I stood up slowly, feeling everyone's eyes on us. Fraud is when you conspire to sell someone else's property for next to nothing through front men. And I was just bidding in a public auction. Say goodbye to your house, you old loser, Felicity hissed through her teeth, forgetting all about decorum. We'll get it anyway, sooner or later. Felicity, Brandon grabbed her arm. Stop it. What? She turned on him. You're still protecting him? After everything we did to get this house? We didn't do anything, Brandon answered quietly. It was your plan and your mother's. I just let it happen. Coward, Felicity spat out. As always. At that moment, Hugo came up to us, holding a folder with documents. Mr. Davison, congratulations on your successful acquisition, he said in an official tone. I've prepared all the necessary paperwork for the transaction. Vanessa, noticing the unfamiliar man, became wary. Who are you? She asked sharply. Honor. Hugo Whitman, Mr. Davison's lawyer? He bowed slightly. And you must be Mrs. Holt? I've heard a lot about you. Vanessa turned pale and took a step back, suddenly realizing that something had gone wrong. She quickly summoned Radley, and they whispered tensely about something. Dad, Brandon put his hand on my shoulder, his voice shaking. I didn't know what they were planning. I mean, I knew about the sale, but not that it would be such a deception. Don't lie, at least now. I shook my head. You knew everything. You just didn't have the courage to confront your wife. Brandon lowered his eyes, unable to find the words to justify it. Felicity seemed to have come to her senses and was now looking at me with cold calculation. Okay, you won this round, she said quietly. But you need to pay $300,000. You don't have it. You're bluffing. Cher mentiu, but you didn't check all the accounts, I replied calmly. I have savings that you don't know about. Grace has always been a prudent woman. Hugo nodded. Mr. Davison is fully solvent. The funds have already been deposited into the city's account as a security deposit. Felicity's face contorted with impotent rage. She grabbed her purse and headed for the exit. Vanessa followed her, throwing me an annihilating glare, dragging a confused Radley with her. Brandon stood next to me, unsure of what to do. Go, I told him. Your wife's waiting for you. Dad, he stammered. I'm sorry. Me too, son, I said. Me too. Brandon stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked slowly toward the exit, as if he were carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. I was left standing in the half-empty hall, holding the plate with the number 17 on it. It was my lucky number now. The house was still mine, but I had lost my son. Although, come to think of it, I'd lost him much sooner. Leonard, Hugo put his hand on my shoulder. I have some paperwork to do. Are you coming? Yes, I nodded, taking my eyes off the door where Brandon had disappeared. Let's go check out my new old property. As we walked out of the hall, I paused for a moment and took a deep breath. I had won the first round, but the war seemed to be just beginning. After the auction, Hugo and I went to his office, a small room in an old building on Main Street, crammed with cabinets of law books and files. Despite the digital age, Hugo preferred paper documents. They never go out of date or get lost when the system crashes, as he liked to say. I sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk, holding a cup of strong black tea. My hands were still shaking from the exertion, but inside I felt the pleasant warmth of victory. You should have seen the look on their faces, Hugo laughed hoarsely, unbuttoning his jacket and settling into his chair. Especially that sister-in-law of yours. I thought she was going to burst with anger. Felicity's never been a loser. I sipped my tea. But this is just the beginning, Hugo. They won't give up that easily. That's why we're prepared. Hugo opened his folder and spread some documents on the table. It's all done to the highest standard. You've officially bought your own house legally. It was ironic. I had to spend $300,000 of Grace's savings to keep the house I already owned. But it was money well spent. What about that repair order? I asked. Does it really exist? It exists, Hugo nodded, but with a lot of irregularities. I did a little research. This Radley guy does have connections in the city government, but he's out of line. The inspector who signed the injunction didn't even inspect your house properly. He just drew up a document based on the photos that Radley gave him. That's a flagrant violation of protocol. What does that mean for us? It means we can challenge the ordinance. Hugo smiled victoriously. I've already filed a complaint with the city council and requested a second inspection. Plus, I did some research on the inspector. Turns out he's a cousin of your mother-in-law's friend. Clear conflict of interest. I shook my head, amazed at the scale of the conspiracy. They really thought it through. But they didn't realize that you could be prepared too. Hugo winked. By the way, you were right to call me right after you overheard their conversation. It gave us time. I remembered the day I'd first come to Hugo's office after I'd heard about the family's plans. My old friend immediately understood the gravity of the situation. We need to act on several fronts, he said then. First, check your finances and make sure you have the funds to participate in the auction. Second, investigate the suspicious ordinance. Third, prepare a legal defense in case they try to challenge the auction results. We started with finance. Hugo helped me access an investment account that Grace and I had set up years ago. We rarely used the money, preferring to live on my pension and a small income from occasional carpentry jobs. Over the decades, the amount in the account had grown to an impressive sum of over $400,000. Brandon and Felicity didn't know the account existed because it was never mentioned on the annual tax documents they helped me fill out. You're lucky your wife was so thoughtful, Hugo remarked as we transferred some of the funds to the special account for the auction. Grace always said, keep some of your eggs in a separate basket that no one can see. I smiled at the memory. She didn't trust banks after the story of her parents losing all their savings during the financial crisis. Hugo then tackled the repair ordinance. He used his connections in the city administration to get a copy of the document and find out who had signed it. Inspector Morris, he said, studying the paper. That name sounds familiar. Oh, yes, Alan Morris. You remember Jennifer Morris, who runs the flower store on Oak Street? That's her husband, and she's in the same book club as Audrey Parker, your mother-in-law's friend, if I'm not mistaken. Too small a town for big secrets, I remarked, and too big a violation for a small town. Hugo tapped his finger on the document. Says here that your house has critical structural damage, requiring immediate repair at a cost of at least $180,000. But judging by the date of the inspection, Morris supposedly inspected your house on a day when you were definitely home all day. You would have noticed the official inspection. I didn't let anyone into the house that day, I confirmed. So there was no inspection, Hugo made a notation. And that's grounds for a challenge. Finally, we worked out a plan of action for the auction itself. Hugo explained to me that legally I had every right to bid for my own house, especially if the auction was ordered by the city and not on my own initiative. But they'll probably be surprised, he warned, and they may try to stop the auction or challenge the results. So I'll be there as your official representative, with a power of attorney and all the necessary documents. Now, sitting in Hugo's office after the successful operation, I felt both relief and anxiety. I had kept my home, but I had lost my family. Although, to be honest, I hadn't had a family for a long time, just the illusion of family ties. What now? I asked, setting the empty cup on the table. Now we wait for their next move. Hugo leaned back in his chair. They may try to challenge the auction results or file a complaint about some breach of procedure, but they don't stand a chance. Everything was conducted according to the rules. Or they could come up with something new, I remarked. Felicity isn't one to give up easily. Well, we'll be ready. Hugo looked confident. I've filed a request to cancel the repair order and appoint a new independent inspection. If we can prove that the first order was improperly obtained, we can claim reimbursement for all expenses, including the cost of the auction. I nodded, feeling fatigue finally catching up with me after a busy day. Thank you, Hugo. I couldn't have done it without you. Come on, he said with a wave of his hand. I've known you for 60 years. You helped me through my divorce from Marge, and I'm helping you keep the house. That's what friends are for. When I got home, there was another business card in the mailbox, this time from Felicity. On the back it said, "This isn't over. Think about your health." The threat was barely veiled, but I only grinned. They didn't know who they were messing with. Over a long life, I've learned patience and resilience. When I was young, I could explode at the slightest injustice, but the years had taught me to wait and hit my target. That night I called Eleanor, my friend Robert's widow, to tell her what had happened. "Leonard, this is unbelievable," she said admiringly after hearing the auction story. "You're a real fighter. Just a stubborn old man who won't give up," I replied, smiling into the phone. "Maybe I should stop by tomorrow," Eleanor suggested, "to see if everything's okay. I wouldn't trust that sister-in-law of yours." "I'd be happy to see you," I said sincerely. "You can have your box too. I was just finishing it." The next morning the doorbell rang. Brandon stood there pale and gaunt, as if he'd been up all night. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I silently stepped aside, letting him into the house. We went into the kitchen where I was making coffee. "Do you want some?" I pointed to the coffee pot. Brandon nodded, avoiding looking me in the eye. I poured 2 cups and sat down across from my son. "Talk," I said simply. "Dad, He hesitated, searching for words. "I came to apologize. What we did, what I allowed to happen, it's unforgivable. Why did you go along with their plan?" I asked you directly. Was the money really that important? Brandon wrinkled his nose as if in physical pain. "It's not just the money, although yes, we are in debt. Felicity's business isn't bringing in the kind of income she was hoping for, and my salary, insurance adjusters aren't millionaires. And that's why you decided to swindle me out of my house?" I tried to speak calmly, but bitterness still broke through my voice. "Serrano, I didn't mean to," Brandon said quietly. "At first it was just a matter of convincing you to sell the house and move to a smaller place so you'd have an easier time coping. But then Vanessa suggested this auction plan, and Felicity got excited about the idea. They said it was just a smart business strategy, nothing personal." "Nothing personal," I grinned bitterly. "It's just depriving a man of the home he's lived in all his life." "I know there's no excuse." Brandon lowered his head. "But I want you to know that I didn't know about the injunction. I thought you really couldn't handle keeping the house, and selling was the best way out." I looked at my son carefully. He'd always been a bad liar. His eyes gave him away. Now there was sincerity mixed with shame. "So what now?" I asked. "Felicity is clearly not going to back down." Brandon hesitated. "We broke up. Yesterday after the auction. She was furious, accusing me of warning you. When I said I hadn't, she called me a useless loser who couldn't even participate in a con properly." I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Part of me sympathized with my son. The other part of me was still too wounded by the betrayal. "She went to her mother's," Brandon continued. "Macron, she said she was going to file for divorce if I didn't help her fix the house permanently." "What did you decide?" Andremer asked, looking at him carefully. "I'm here to warn you," Brandon said firmly, finally looking up. "They're not going to stop. Vanessa was talking about some kind of plan B if the auction fell through. Something to do with your health and capacity." I nodded. That was to be expected. It was a classic move to declare an elderly person incapacitated and take control of their estate. Thanks for the warning, I said, but I'm prepared for this. Hugo has documentation from my doctor confirming my excellent mental health. Besides, I smiled slightly, after yesterday's auction, they'll have a hard time proving that I'm incapable of making rational decisions. Brandon smiled back weakly. You were always one step ahead of me, Dad. I should have remembered that before I let myself get dragged into this adventure. We finished our coffee in silence. Then Brandon stood up. I'm going to go. I have a lot to think about, but I wanted you to know that I'm on your side no matter what happens next. Time will tell, I replied, taking my time to forgive him. Trust is easy to break, but hard to rebuild. When he left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the old pictures on the wall. Grace with little Brandon in her arms, Brandon in his graduation robe. Our family happy and whole before the disease took Grace, before Felicity came into our lives. Hugo's call brought me out of my reverie. I have news, he said without preamble. I've received confirmation from the city council. The independent inspection is scheduled for tomorrow. And one more thing. Our complaint against Inspector Morris has been accepted. It seems we're not the first to complain about his special approach to the job. Good, I said, but be prepared that they might try to declare me incompetent. Brandon just warned me about that. Brandon, Hugo wondered. Had he defected? Looks like it. He and Felicity had broken up. So, Hugo paused. Don't trust him completely, Leo. It could be part of their new strategy. I know, I sighed, but he's my son, Hugo, my only child, and that's why they can use him against you, Hugo reminded me. Be careful. After talking to Hugo, I went down to the workshop. Working with wood always helped me think. I pulled out a recent project, a small cherrywood coffee table I was going to give Eleanor. Hardwood shavings fell to the floor as thoughts lined up in my head. I had no doubt that Felicity and Vanessa would make another attempt. The only question was how far they were willing to go. And could I trust Brandon when he said he'd come over to my side? Time would tell. In the meantime, I had my home, my friends, and my workshop. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The week after the auction was spent in anxious anticipation. I was living like a minefield, not knowing where the next blow would come from. An independent inspection of the house, organized by Hugo, revealed only a few minor problems in need of repair. A leaky faucet in the second-floor bathroom, a crack in one of the window panes, frayed wiring in the basement. Nothing like the critical structural damage listed in Inspector Morris's order. That's enough to completely negate the first order, Hugo said as we reviewed the new inspection. I'm preparing a formal request to cancel the auction and give you a refund. The city will have to refund you $300,000. If it's that simple, why do you look worried? I asked, noticing Hugo frowning as he looked over the documents. Sure no war, because it's too smooth. He tapped his finger on the inspection report. Felicity and Vanessa aren't the type to give up easily. They had to do something else. And it was suspiciously quiet around here. He was right. Neither Felicity nor Vanessa called or showed up. Even Brandon seemed to have vanished after that one visit. I called him several times, but no one picked up. Friday morning, while I was working in the workshop on a coffee table for Eleanor, the doorbell rang. On the doorstep stood a young man in a smart suit with a leather folder under his arm. Mr. Davison? Leonard Davison? He asked in an official tone. Yes, that's me. My name is Jeremy Pierce. I represent the law firm of Holder and Associates. He handed me a business card. I have a few questions regarding your estate. I scrutinized the card. Holder and Associates, specializing in real estate and land law. Who is your client, Mr. Pierce? I asked bluntly. Orem Development, he replied, slightly surprised by my question. They are interested in acquiring your property for a new residential development project. Orem Development? The name sounded unfamiliar. Never heard of them. They're a new company in the Worcester market. Pierce smiled a practiced smile. They specialize in redevelopment of historic districts. May I come in? I'd like to discuss their proposal. I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him inside. Something told me Felicity and Vanessa were behind this, but I'd better find out what they were up to. We went into the living room and Pierce pulled a glossy brochure out of a folder with a picture of fancy townhouses with a park in the background. Beacon Gardens is the name of the new development, he began, laying out the materials on the coffee table. 6 luxury townhouses overlooking the park, using environmentally friendly materials and state-of-the-art technology. And where is this complex planned? On me, I asked, although I already guessed the answer. Here, Pierce pointed to the map in the booklet. On the site of your house and the adjacent plot. And who are the owners of Orem Development? I looked at him carefully. Pierce hesitated. I'm not authorized to divulge that information, but I can assure you that they are respectable businessmen with extensive experience in real estate. Mr. Pierce, I put the booklet aside, tell your clients that I'm not selling the house. Not now, not in the foreseeable future. But you haven't even listened to the offer, he objected. They're willing to pay well above market value. How much? I asked out of curiosity. $500,000, Pierce said proudly. That's 40% above the current appraisal. I shook my head. Tell Orem Development that the house is not for sale at any price. And tell Vanessa Holt and Felicity Davison that I'm not as stupid as they think. Pierce's face stretched. I don't know who you're talking about. Of course. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Good day, Mr. Pierce. As soon as he left, I called Hugo and told him about the strange visit. Orem Development, you say? Hugo hummed. We'll check it out in a moment. An hour later, he called back. The company was registered 3 weeks ago. Guess who the director is? Vanessa? I guessed. Close. Audrey Parker, her best friend. And the main investor is some company from the Cayman Islands. I bet if you dig deeper, you'll find a connection to Vanessa. So the auction plan failed, and now they're trying to buy the house outright, I concluded. I guess so. But why are they being so generous all of a sudden? $500,000 is really above market price. Because the townhouses on this lot will bring them many times more, I suggested. But there's only one way to know for sure. What are you up to, Leo? Hugo sounded worried. I want to talk to Brandon. Straight up. After talking to Hugo, I tried my son again. This time the phone picked up after the 3rd ring. Dad? Brandon sounded tired. We need to talk, I said without preamble. A representative from Orem Development came to see me today. A pause on the other end of the line. I'll be there in an hour, Brandon finally answered and hung up. He showed up even earlier, 45 minutes later. He looked even worse than the last time he'd been there. Wrinkled suit, stubble on his face, bags under his eyes. Would you like a drink? I asked as I led him into the living room. Coffee, or something stronger. Coffee, please, he sank into a chair. With whiskey if you have it. I grinned. Apparently the situation was really difficult if my son, who usually avoided alcohol, was asking for whiskey in the middle of the day. I made him a coffee with some good Scotch whiskey added. Myself a simple black coffee. So, I sat down across from him. What's going on? Brandon took a big sip, crinkled his nose, and set the cup down. Felicity filed for divorce. She's demanding half of all the assets and alimony, and she claims I blew a big deal that would have made us a fortune. Beacon Gardens townhouses? I asked. Brandon nodded. You know, I was shown the brochure today. It's a very ambitious project. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Brandon rubbed his face with his hands. The townhouses were just the first phase. After them, they planned to buy up the neighboring lots and build a whole residential complex with stores and offices. Worcester's New Center, they called it. They? I raised an eyebrow. Felicity, Vanessa, and Audrey, Brandon explained. Vanessa had long wanted to get into real estate, and Felicity needed money to expand her boutique. Audrey put up the initial capital. And when had they conceived this plan? Almost a year ago, Brandon lowered his eyes. After you refused to move in with us or into a nursing home, they decided that the only way to get your lot was to get rid of the house. The plan was to wait for a natural solution. My death, you mean? I said without anger, just stating a fact. Yes, he swallowed. But then there was this investor who needed to make a quick investment, and the plan was accelerated. And you agreed to be a part of it? I looked at my son carefully. Brandon looked up, his eyes a mixture of shame and despair. We're in debt, Dad. We're in a lot of debt. Felicity's boutique isn't turning a profit, and I lost my job 6 months ago. The insurance company downsized. What? I was genuinely surprised. Why didn't you tell me? How could I? Brandon grinned bitterly. You always thought I was a loser who chose a stable job over a real business. And I even failed at that. His words hurt me. Had I been so bad at showing my love that my son was afraid to admit failure? Where are you working now? I asked quietly. Nowhere. He shook his head. I make a few odd jobs, consulting. Felicity told everyone I was working from home, as a consultant. In reality, I just sat at home and sent out resumes. And the money? How did you live? Loans. Brandon reached for his cup again. Lots of loans. Felicity took them out to grow the boutique, but spent them on maintaining our lifestyle. Expensive car, designer clothes, private school for Ethan, none of which we could afford. I've been trying to make sense of what I've heard. My son hid his unemployment for 6 months, was in debt, and agreed to participate in my house scam out of desperation. Why didn't you ask for help? I finally broke the heavy silence. I have savings. I could have. Pride, Brandon interrupted. Stupid, meaningless pride. And fear of Felicity. She's manipulative. When the house plan came up, she made it sound like it would not only solve our financial problems, but also help you. You'd get the money for the house that you would have left me as an inheritance anyway. And we'd relieve you of the burden of maintaining the old building. And then Quentin Radley showed up with a repair order. I continued. Yeah, Brandon nodded. It was Vanessa's idea. She knew you'd never sell the house willingly, so she needed to create a situation where you'd have no choice. So you planned to buy the house at auction for next to nothing through a front man. And then tear it down and build townhouses, Brandon finished. Vanessa had already made arrangements with a construction company. The project was going to bring in about $2 million in net profit. I whistled. The amount was impressive. And now what? They're trying to buy the house outright for $500,000? Yeah, but that's just part of the new plan. Brandon finished his coffee in one gulp. If you refuse, they'll sue to have you declared incompetent. They've got some doctor ready to give an opinion. And since I'm your next of kin, you'll be the guardian and you can sell the house, I finished for him. Theoretically, yes, he looked me in the eye. But I won't do it, Dad, I swear. That's why I came to warn you. They plan to act quickly, as soon as next week. I scrutinized my son's face. Was it genuine remorse or just another manipulation? But his eyes didn't lie. They showed real pain and shame. Why did you decide to tell me all this? I asked. You could have stayed with Felicity, gotten your share of the deal, solved the financial problems. Because there are things more important than money, Brandon answered quietly. I realized that when I saw you fighting for your house, you were willing to spend all your savings to preserve your family's legacy. And I was willing to destroy it all for money. He paused, then added, and also because I don't want to be like Felicity. She measures everything in dollars. Even people are judged by how much they can bring her. I've let her dictate my life for too long. I stared at my son in silence, not knowing what to say. For so many years, there had been a wall of misunderstanding between us, and now, at the worst possible moment, we were finally coming clean. What are you going to do next? I finally asked. I don't know, Brandon shrugged. Get a job, get an apartment, start over, I guess. And the debts? I'll pay it off little by little. He smiled weakly. It'll take years, but at least I'll know I'm doing the right thing. I thought about it. My son was sitting in front of me who had made a mistake, but had the strength to admit it. Could I turn my back on him now? You could stay here until you get back on your feet, I suggested, surprised at my own words. There was plenty of room in the house. Brandon looked up at me in surprise. After everything I've done, would you let me stay? You're my son, I answered simply, and this house has been in our family for 3 generations. Someday it will pass to you, and then to Ethan. Unless, of course, you tear it down, I added with a slight chuckle. Never, Brandon said firmly. I realized how important this house was to our family, to you. Then it's settled, I nodded. Move your stuff in when you're ready. Brandon stood up and hesitantly stepped toward me. Dad, Thank you. I stood up too, and after a second's hesitation, I hugged my son. He was a head taller than I was, but in that moment he seemed as lost as he had been when he came to me with a broken knee or a broken toy. We'll get through this, I said, patting him on the back. But first we have to deal with Felicity and Vanessa. Brandon nodded, pulling away. I have proof of their collusion. Emails, tapes of conversations with Radley. I started collecting them after the auction, just in case. Smart, I nodded approvingly. Give everything to Hugo. He'll know what to do with it. When Brandon left, I sat in the living room for a long time, thinking about our conversation. I'd made the hard decision to give my son a second chance despite the betrayal. I'm not sure I did the right thing, but at my age you begin to realize that family ties are the only thing left when everything else is gone. That evening, Hugo called. Leo, we got confirmation from the city council. The repair order has been invalidated. What's more, Inspector Morris has been suspended pending an investigation. The auction money will be refunded within 2 weeks. Nyam. That's great news, and I replied. But it's not over yet. Felicity and Vanessa are preparing a new blow. They want to declare me incompetent. I briefly recounted my conversation with Brandon. Hugo paused. Are you sure you can trust him? No, I answered honestly. But he's my son, and I want to give him a chance to redeem himself. I understand. Hugo's voice was non-judgmental. Well, if he's really on your side, his testimony against Felicity and Vanessa could be very useful. Have him contact me as soon as possible. I will, I promised. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the porch, taking a long look at my old house, towering in the fading dusk. It had witnessed so many events in our family's life, joys and sorrows, births and deaths. And now that it was threatened, I felt like its protector, the last guardian of family history. I will not let Felicity and Vanessa destroy our legacy, even if it means going to extreme lengths to do so. The events of the following weeks unfolded rapidly. Felicity, as Brandon had predicted, filed a petition in court to have me declared incompetent. However, thanks to Hugo's advanced preparation of documents from my doctor and psychiatrist, as well as evidence of collusion provided by Brandon, the court denied her petition. Moreover, the judge specifically noted the attempted auction fraud and recommended that prosecutors consider criminal prosecution against Felicity, Vanessa, and Quentin Radley. Brandon temporarily moved into my house, occupying his former childhood room on the second floor. At first, tension and awkwardness persisted between us, but as time went on, the ice began to melt. Brandon had found a new job at an insurance company in a neighboring town and drove there every morning in his tattered sedan, the one he'd been left with after splitting the estate with Felicity. We often talked in the evenings, sitting in the living room with cups of tea or glasses of whiskey, depending on the gravity of the day. These conversations gradually revealed to me the inner world of my son, whom it turned out I didn't know at all. His dreams, his fears, his frustrations, all the things we'd never talked about before, when Grace was alive or when Felicity came into our lives. You know, I've always wanted to learn your craft, Brandon admitted one day, eyeing the glass of amber liquid. I was just afraid I wouldn't live up to your expectations. My expectations? I wondered. I've never demanded perfection from you. Not in word, he replied quietly. But I've seen you work. Your hands created such things. I thought I'd never be able to do that. Those words made me wonder. Was I really unknowingly pressuring my son with my unspoken expectations? Perhaps my passion for excellence in woodworking had scared him away from the family craft. It's never too late to learn, I said after a pause. If you want to, of course. Brandon looked up at me in surprise. You'd teach me? Now? Why wouldn't I? I shrugged. I have plenty of time, and you live here now. We could work together in the workshop on weekends. So began our strange reconciliation. Not through words and explanations, but through working together. Every Saturday and Sunday we would go down to the workshop and I would show Brandon the basics of woodworking, how to choose the material, how to feel the grain of the wood, how to work with the tools. To my surprise, he discovered he had a real talent. His hands, unsure at first, quickly learned to understand wood, to see in a shapeless piece of wood the future product. Despite these moments of intimacy, however, Something between us remained unspoken. Brandon had always been too malleable to outside influences, first mine, then Felicity's. I feared that this character trait would sooner or later lead him to make bad decisions again. One evening, as we were working on a small dresser for his room, I decided to have a frank conversation. Brandon, I began, putting the planner aside, we need to talk about the future. The future? He looked up from the box he was working on. I'm grateful for your help with Felicity and the trial, and I'm glad we've reconnected. But I'm not sure our living together is the best solution in the long run. Brandon slowly put the instrument down and straightened up. You want me to move out? I want you to live your life, I replied. You're 42 years old, Brandon. You should have your own life, not be a caregiver to your elderly father. But I don't see it as a burden, he countered. I like living here, working with you. Right now, I nodded. But what about a year from now? 2 years from now? You'll want a new relationship, maybe a new family, and I'll be, a liability. Brandon was silent for a long moment, thinking about what I was saying. You're right, he said finally. But I don't want to just walk away and leave you alone. Not after everything that's happened. I'm not asking you to disappear, I smiled. I just want each of us to have our own space and our own lives. You can come to visit and we'll still work together in the workshop, but we need to live separately. After that conversation, Brandon started looking for an apartment in Worcester. After a couple of weeks, he found a small but cozy apartment near the city center and gradually moved his things there. Our Saturday workshop sessions continued, but now they were meetings between two adults, not forced cohabitation. As for Felicity and Vanessa, financial disaster befell them. After the scandal of attempted fraud, investors refused to cooperate with Orem Development, and Audrey Parker hurried to distance herself from her former friends to save her reputation. Felicity's boutique closed due to debt, and Vanessa was forced to sell her designer clothing store to cover legal fees. I felt no gloating over their collapse, only relief that the threat had passed. Brandon obtained a divorce, leaving Felicity most of the jointly acquired property in exchange for her dropping her claim to the house and dropping the lawsuits. One day, about 3 months after all these events, I was sitting on the porch enjoying a warm spring day when a familiar car pulled up to the house. Eleanor Price, the widow of an old friend of mine, got out of the car holding a basket covered with a plaid napkin. I thought you could use some home baking, she said as she climbed the porch steps. Apple pie, your favorite. You always know how to cheer up an old man, I smiled, accepting the basket. Eleanor was 68, but she looked much younger than her years. Lively brown eyes, neatly styled gray hair, energetic movements. Since her husband's death, she had led an active life. She traveled, gardened, and participated in the community work of the local library. How is your son? She asked, sitting down next to me on the bench. Is he still learning woodworking? He has a real talent, I said proudly. He's making a coffee table for his apartment. I think he would have made a great cabinet maker if he'd started earlier. It's never too late to find your calling, Eleanor said. Look at me. I started painting at 65, and now a local gallery buys my watercolors. We sat on the porch until sundown, talking about everything from politics to gardening. Eleanor had always been easy. She didn't demand constant attention, didn't try to fill the pauses with meaningless chatter. We could sit in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear over the horizon, and then continue our conversation as if nothing had happened. You know, I said as darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, I'm thinking of expanding the workshop. Are you? Eleanor turned to me. Yes, I nodded. I want to remodel part of the first floor. I want to make bigger windows to let in more natural light. Maybe even start taking orders again. That's a great idea, she said. Your work has always been a work of art. Remember the study table you made for Robert? It was his pride and joy. I remember that desk. Massive, dark oak, lots of drawers and secret compartments. I'd worked on it for almost 6 months, putting my soul into every detail. I miss work, I admitted. Real work, not just a hobby to pass the time. I want to feel like I'm creating something meaningful again, something that will outlive me. Then do it, Eleanor said simply. You've always been the best craftsman around. I'm sure the orders will come in once people know you're back in business. That night, after I saw Eleanor off, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was swarming with plans for remodeling the workshop, lists of tools and materials needed, and ideas for new products. For the first time in years, I felt excitement and anticipation, as I had when I was a young man just starting out in the craft. The next day I called Hugo and told him of my plans. He was, as always, understanding and offered to help me with all the necessary paperwork to start a small business. Just don't overdo it, old man, he warned me. At our age, you need to take care of your health. Surnun, working with wood is the best cure for old age, I objected. As long as my hands can hold a tool, I'll work. Brandon enthusiastically supported my idea and offered to help remodel the space. The following Saturday, we started work, removing the partition between the former storage room and the small living room on the first floor, clearing a large space for the future workshop. And it's going to be great, Brandon said as he looked around. High ceilings, good lighting. You could have a window so people could see your work from the street. And yours too, I added. If you want to, of course. Brandon looked at me in surprise. Are you serious? I'm just a beginner. Some of your work is already pretty good, I said honestly. And with practice, they'll get even better. Besides, I need an assistant. I can't work as hard as I used to. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Brandon looked confused. I have a job at an insurance company. Think about it. I put my hand on his shoulder. Don't decide anything right now. Just know that the door's open if you want to go back to the family trade. A few weeks later, the new workshop was ready. A bright, spacious room with large windows facing the street, handy workbenches, shelves of tools, racks of materials. I hung a small sign on the door. Davison and Son, handcrafted carpentry. And Son? Brandon was surprised when he saw the sign. But it's not like I work with you all the time. Not yet, I replied, but the door is always open. And who knows, maybe one day you'll decide that making beautiful things with your hands is better than filling out insurance forms. The first orders didn't take long to arrive. At first it was small works, to restore an antique chair, to make a frame for a picture, a small shelf for books. But gradually word of mouth spread the news of the revival of Davison's workshop, and there were more serious orders. Eleanor became a frequent visitor to the house. She brought lunches when I was too busy working to cook, helped with paperwork and orders, and sometimes just sat in the studio with her watercolor sketchbook, painting while I worked. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she suddenly asked, Leonard, have you ever thought about getting married again? The question took me by surprise. After Grace died, I hadn't even considered a new relationship. Honestly, no, I answered. Why do you ask? Eleanor blushed slightly, a surprisingly touching sight for a woman of her age. I just thought, we spend so much time together, and I think we're good together. I took her hand, a slender one, with delicate artist's fingers, covered with tiny specks of paint. Honeymoon, we're really good together, I agreed. And frankly, I can't imagine my life without you. But I'm 76, Eleanor. I'm a stubborn old man with a complicated character and a complicated past. I'm 68, Leonard. She squeezed my hand. I'm not a young girl either. I have my quirks and habits. But is that a reason to give up happiness at our age? There was so much warmth and understanding in her eyes that all my doubts began to melt away. You know, I said after a pause, I'm not ready for another wedding, but I would be happy if you agreed to move in with me. There are too many empty rooms and too little life in this house. I agree, Eleanor said simply, resting her head on my shoulder. Thus began a new phase of my life, unexpected but wonderful. Eleanor moved in with me, bringing fresh energy and comfort to the old house. Her watercolors adorned the walls, and flowers bloomed again in the garden that had been neglected for years. Brandon came to visit often, sometimes with Ethan, who was visiting on vacation from college. My grandson, to my surprise, also showed an interest in woodworking and enjoyed spending time in the workshop when he came to Worcester. As for Felicity, I never saw her again. According to Brandon, she had moved to another state after her divorce to start over. Vanessa, as far as I knew, had sold her house in Worcester and moved to Florida. I had no hatred for them, only indifference. They were part of a past that no longer had power over my present. One warm summer evening, almost a year after all these events, Eleanor and I sat on the porch watching the stars. The house behind us glowed with warm lights, alive, inhabited, filled with new memories. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, noticing my pensive gaze. "About how strange life is," I answered. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. A son, a home, a future. And now I have you. A revitalized workshop, a new relationship with Brandon and Ethan. Life always gives you a second chance," Eleanor smiled. "You just have to be willing to take it." I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling incredibly grateful for this unexpected gift of fate. A new beginning at an age when most people only think about the end of the road. An unfinished sideboard for the town library waited in the workshop. Apples for Eleanor's fall pie were ripening in the garden, and Brandon was due to arrive the following Saturday to help with a new order. Life went on, not what I had envisioned when I lost Grace 5 years ago, but full and happy in its own way. I had finally found what I hadn't even realized I was looking for. Not just a home to keep, but one filled with new life and new love, leaving behind the bitterness of betrayal and resentment. There were many more days ahead, filled with the smell of freshly cut wood, quiet evenings with Eleanor, and Saturday classes for Brandon and Ethan. And for the first time in a long time, I looked to the future with hope and quiet confidence.